Hi, my name is Ken Davidian, and welcome to Organization Theory in Space, or OT in Space. This is the second season in which we cover each chapter of the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Change and Innovation, edited by Marshall Scott Poole and Andy Van de Ven, second edition. In this video, we cover Chapter 4 of the handbook, entitled Upside Down Organizational Change, Sense-making, Sense-giving, and the New Generation. In this chapter, we'll talk about many different aspects of sense-making and sense-giving, including their definitions, processes, key features, forms, a perspective that is dynamic and longitudinal, and we'll finish up by discussing the impact of the Millennial generation entering the workforce en masse on organizational change. So, what is sense-making? Sense-making is an iterative process between understanding issues or events that are ambiguous, confusing, or unexpected, and then doing something to enable future understanding and action. Sense-making is typically categorized as top-down, leadership-led, and therefore teleologic. We talked about teleologic change back in Chapter 1. It should be noted, however, the top-down perspective tends to overlook the influence of lower-level managers and staff on organizational change. External sources such as market demand can stimulate organizational change and sense-making in top leadership, but the end goal is usually not fully defined. So the change process ends up being constructed, negotiated, and produced in real time through interactions and discussions. As a change process that is teleological, leadership engages in sense-giving to others, typically at low levels of the organization, who then react in any combination of ways, which can include a mix of adoption, alteration, resistance, or rejection of the proposed change. This provides feedback to the leadership that can result in modifications of the original change plans. This is why organizational change is characterized as a negotiated sense-making process. So, the key features of sense-making include some important change drivers introduced from within the organization, referred to as internal dynamics, such as changes in organizational leadership or strategies, corporate mergers, acquisitions, or spin-offs. Changes also originate from external or outside sources, such as social movements or, a global pandemic, perhaps. The resulting sense-making often involves cognitive changes to the organizational identity, how individuals perceive the organization, which can result in changes to organizational meanings, values, and beliefs. As we'll find out in Chapter 5, all of these things can influence organizational culture as well. Researchers identified a simplified typology of sense-making forms based on the extent to which leadership and other stakeholders engage in sense-giving, the activity of communicating to others the goals and visions of an organizational change. A high level of leadership sense-giving results in a restricted form of sense-making, where stakeholders take a backseat to leadership efforts, and the negotiated contribution of the sense-making process is limited. On the other hand, with greater involvement by the stakeholders to help guide the sense-giving process, this results in a guided effort of sense-making. Lower levels of effort by leadership in sense-giving result in a fragmented sense-making process if the stakeholders are active in sense-giving, or a minimal sense-making process if both the leadership and stakeholders are not much help in the sense-giving effort. Since organizations are always changing in response to internal and external stimuli, they are referred to as dynamic. Also, since organizational change takes place over a long period of time, studies of organizational change are typically longitudinal. The dynamic and longitudinal perspective of organizational change has different strengths and deficiencies. The strengths include a focus on both the cognitive and action aspects of change, addressing the contributions to change by members at many levels of the organization, and the spanning of long periods of time, aka the longitudinal perspective, and the multidisciplinary and integrative approach to studying change. Some of the deficiencies of this perspective include the primary focus on external change stimuli, giving internal change stimuli less attention than it might deserve, the tendency to study organizational changes after their announcement and not studying the issues and events leading up to the change in the first place, and finally, the focus on senior leadership ignoring the contributions to organizational change by lower level managers and staff. And speaking of the contributions of lower level managers and staff, the millennial generation are a big reason why models of organizational change might need to be updated. Based on recent research, it turns out the millennial employees are more tech savvy than their past generations. They are more confident, comfortable in expressing their ideas, initiating and advocating for change, rarely define a successful career as a long career in one job, expect more from their workplaces than previous generations, and are not afraid to leave a job to pursue opportunities better aligning with their identity and values. In other words, their behavior could be characterized as not necessarily wishing to be retained by a single employer. From the employer's perspective, it's very expensive to hire and onboard people, so they have a strong motivation to retain new employees. The stereotype of a successful career in the mid-20th century was to be a long-term employee in a big organization by becoming a company man. And yes, it was primarily men at that time. Today, with the millennial generation not wanting to entirely conform to organizational norms, we see a phenomenon called alignment inversion, where organizations are changing in response to the younger employees' wants. So, in summary of Chapter 4, past portrayals of organizational change focused on top-down or teleologic change that is well-planned, transformative, and revolutionary. And bottom-up change, when addressed, was modeled as incremental and evolutionary. However, there are new societal shifts rooted in younger generations, creating a break from the past and adopting new ways that result in revisions of the past portrayals of how organization change occurred. These revisions recognize that lower-level employees demand to have their voices be heard and have mastered the means of sense giving and influence. One observation as a result is that businesses no longer exist solely to solve customers' problems, but are now expected to help solve the world's problems. So that's it for Chapter 4 of the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Change and Innovation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you consider subscribing so that you can be notified of upcoming videos as they are released. OT in Space was produced by IRL, which stands for Impossible Research LLC. IRL conducts process research on the topics of innovation and industry emergence within the space sector context. IRL also offers services of organization theory consulting, research consulting, and STEAM outreach. This video is intended for educational purposes only.